Hi, this is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series. Today is part 2 of American Kenpo and Jeet Kune. We'll be looking at the development of these systems or these styles or this martial arts science from the two pioneers that created them. Senior Grand Master Edmund Parker, founder of American Kenpo, and Bruce Lee, the founder of Jeet Kune. Today, I am very honored to have here with us two men that are looked upon with great reverence, innovative, incredible contributions to the martial arts through their way. And we're going to be discussing that with, first of all, with founding Grand Master of the IKCA, International Karate Connection Association, Mr. Chuck Sullivan. Hello, Chuck.
Morning, Paul.
It's good to have you here. And tonight or today, I'm going to refer to you, if you don't mind, I will refer to you as Chuck. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's just something I learned from Mr. Parker, but I always like to start off with that. And also with us, Sijo Steve Muhammad. It is so good to have you, sir. This is returning back and being reunited with your teacher, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir. It's my honor to be here with you and also with my teacher.
God bless you, sir. The point we're going to have today is a little discussion, some fun. We'll build some foundation from both of you. And then I'm just going to let you guys respond in your personal opinion. And if we're not sure of something, we're not going to talk about it or a fact. I'm not big on facts because everybody always challenges on facts. They never challenge on our opinion. Oh, it was nighttime. No, it was daytime. Well, it depends on where you are. You know what I'm talking about. So anyway, so get away from it. So with that in mind, both of you gentlemen started off in American Kenpo created by Ed Parker. As you went through your journey through there, later on, you explored your own path, as Mr. Parker would probably encourage you. And because of that, your path brought you in front of other people. So I'm going to reference today most of the material that I will be referencing that I've discussed before, which are in Parker's case, I like it, the Infinite Insights. As you can see, they're well worn because I've gone through them for years and years and years. And these are the writings of Ed Parker from the 1980s while he was alive. This was printed and distributed. Also, as to the philosophical side, which will also cross over to Mr. Lee, I'll be quoting some stuff maybe from Mr. Parker's Zen and the Zen of Kenpo, which came out. The other two books that both used would be, and which I know that you adhere to these thoughts because you probably have referenced them, is The Art of War, Sun Tzu, amazing book, been over 2,500 years, and you know, it still is a required reading in most military and business schools because it has amazing principles and thoughts. And the other book would be Miyamoto Musashi's book, The Book of Five Rings. So I've got those. The two books that I reference sometimes with Mr. Lee came out after his passing. The most popular one would be this Tao of Jeet Kune, which came out like 75 or so. And I think it's because he was such an influence and being innovative in certain ways. But these are his personal notes, and these were printed subsequent to his passing. And the other book that came out was something which is interesting. It's called Bruce Lee's Fighting Method. And again, these two books came out after Mr. Lee's passing, but the influence there I'll relate to between the two men in a few moments. So let's start off with this. Let's go back to the foundation. Bruce Lee would say the style is everything but nothing. In other words, you have to empty your cup to fill your cup. And then he used a lot of references to Lao Tzu's Tao of water. Parker, again, being from the islands of Hawaii, obviously knew this well. His upbringing in the martial arts centered around things like Western boxing, jiu-jitsu, grappling, training with Mr. Chow, and eventually reinventing himself when he came to America. That brings us to Mr. Sullivan's involvement. Mr. Sullivan, let's just talk about the early beginnings of American Kenpo and what you derive from that as a foundation for your own personal way.
When I started with Ed Parker in February of 1959, so next month it's going to be 62 years ago, which is hard to believe. He did an interview when I had only been in New York for a short time. I think I was perhaps a brown belt at the time. And there was an LA columnist that did an interview of him at a demonstration. Actually, it wasn't an interview, it was a demonstration. And then the columnist asked Ed Parker a question. And I never forget it because, well, first of all, because of his answer. But he said to him, he said, "Can you describe what you do in just a few words?" And I remember the old man, who was about 28 years old at the time, 29 maybe, and not a very old man, paused for a moment and he looked at the guy and he says, "Yeah." He says, "It's organized, scientific, dirty fighting." And that's how the columnist headlined his column the next day: "Organized, scientific, dirty fighting." Last night, I was at a place called the Dojo in West Los Angeles and met a man called by the name of Ed Parker, and he wrote this article, which did the school a whole lot of good. And I always remembered that quote that he said that night, and I never heard him say it again. It was just something, I don't know if he came up with it that particular night or what, but I thought to myself at the time, I really like that, because that eliminates all the rules. We have no rules in what we do. We will hurt as hard and as fast as we possibly can to extricate ourselves from that situation, get the hell out of there, and having done what we've done. Organized, scientific, dirty fight. You know, back in the 30s and the 40s, if you were in a bar and got into a fight and you went to kick a guy, the whole bar might jump on you. That was dirty fighting. You can't do that. That's against the rules. What rules? What the hell are you talking about? Anyhow, now later on in the 60s and 70s, somebody would do a head high kick and everybody said, "Wow, did you see that? What a great kick." Suddenly it wasn't dirty fighting anymore. It was exotic martial arts. Or
Let's go
martial
to your
science.
student, Steve, Sijo Muhammad. Is it dirty fighting, sir?
Well, that's what you call fighting.
There is no clean fighting. That's boxing. That's wrestling. There are rules. They keep it that way so that people don't get killed or seriously injured. That's our whole point. Is to seriously injure our opponents so we can get out. We can leave.
But it's funny you say that, because from birth, we've been kicking all those 9 months in our mothers to wait to get on out. So kicking was not foreign to us.
No. But it was when it came to fighting, long time ago, when I was young.
Was it, Sijo Muhammad, was it because we, as martial artists studying the martial science, is it because of conformity?
I'm not understanding the question that you're asking.
Well, we are taught that to only apply a kick in a certain way, society says you're not allowed to do that. However, a martial artist is going to say, aha, this is a battle, and we will understand the difference between a disagreement, a heated exchange, and actual combat.
Oh, yes, sir. In the beginning, like my teacher said, when you were in the street and learning the martial science in the beginning, and you would throw a kick at someone, everybody there wanted to beat you up because you threw a kick. But as they began to see or understand or notice that there is a science called karate, they began to understand why we kick. So as you went on into the science of fighting, there was less people talking to you about you're fighting dirty, or that's wrong, you're not supposed to do that. The martial science coming along and getting to be noticed, that changed all of that.
We put a lot of reliance, the general public and also the martial arts community, on things like the movie industry, and we're seeing all the fancy kicking styles that go in there with basically almost gymnastics. You'll see people doing spinning, flying, aerial type of kicks and whatnot. Have we gone too far with that?
Probably. Yeah, probably, because there are things you can do on film that you can't do in reality. For instance, all you have to do in a movie is to do a particular move one time perfectly, and that's what the world sees. Never mind the 99 times that you didn't do it right, you didn't get it right, it wasn't exactly perfect. They see the one time that it was. And if it wasn't, they can computer graphics the thing so that it becomes that way. They can have you doing things just by simple cutting that the human body is capable of. They can have you jumping over an 8-foot link fence, chain link fence in one bound. Very simple. They show the camera, they show your feet leaving, they show you in the air, they cut the thing down so that it's only a foot high, and you jump over it, they show that, and they show you landing. 3 or 4 cuts, and you've just jumped over that fence. The human eye picks it up and conceives it that way, and they just see you jump over a fence. Not possible.
When Mr. Parker was developing the system of Kenpo, his background was in real life combat, correct?
Pretty much so. Yeah, he grew up in Honolulu and on the rough end of it, not down in the genteel area of the tourists.
So we're looking at actual street fighting.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, so the practical aspect of fighting was to be efficient, effective, authentic, and be able to walk away. Am I correct?
That's right. You get to go home. The other guy gets to wait for the ambulance.
Sijo Muhammad, when you're in your early part of your training of your martial arts with Mr. Sullivan, what was the approach to the fundamentals of kicking?
Well, before I get into that, I would like to say that we were at a demonstration one day, and Mr. Sullivan had taken me there, and he wanted to do techniques like 5-sword and leaping crane, and I could not do those things that well. I couldn't see how to do them. So he told me that day, he said, Steve, he said, when you're out there and you're trying to do the techniques, he says, you seem to be able to follow a line, or I call it today, read the language of the body, and you attack them according to the language of the body. And so he had me to do that one day, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack because I knew I didn't know 5 swords, but I found that I could read the language. Whatever way his body moved, I could read that language and I could follow that language when whatever the opponent did. And I got out there and I did the moves. I was so nervous in the beginning when we first got started that I was sure that I wasn't going to do well. But I did what I knew how to do, which was follow the line, like actual fighting. Because when you do 5 swords, the man may not be in that position when you actually strike him in real time. So I was trying to follow what he would do and what he does when I strike at him. If his head leaned a certain way, I would attack that angle. So that day I started learning how, and why he told me what he told me. Just actually get out there and follow the lines of your opponent as you've been doing when we try to do techniques. And for that, Grand Master, I thank you for that.
It sounds like to me it became instinctual for you. The response was the individual's attack rather than trying to force the round cylinder into the square peg. You were adapting and being yourself.
Well, you know, Paul, that's how we started with freestyle. Nobody knew how to freestyle in the beginning. Nobody taught it. And we just observed each other. And you'd see somebody do a good move, and then you try to replicate that. I know Steve watched me, and then later on, I watched him. And one night, it was funny because one night I said to him after watching him fight for several minutes, he sat down and we're sitting there both sweating, our, our gis were drenched. And I said to him, I said, Steve, do you realize you never put your rear heel down? And he said, I don't. Well, try it sometime and you'll find that it makes you so much faster to keep that heel aloft and your leg loaded at all times, that rear leg at all times. It makes you faster forward, it makes you faster backward. And I picked that up from him. And I don't, at the time, he wasn't even aware that he was doing it. Now, if you look at any BKF fighter in the world, they've all got that heel up. You remember that, Steve?
Yes, sir. And another thing is that if you throw, I found that the minute that I threw a punch at someone, and if he leaned his head back with the same arm, I throw a punch, then I throw a forearm into the neck. If he, like a finger poke to the eye, he leans his head back with the same hand, I could hit into the throat with the same hand. I call that reading the language of the body. If the punch at his face and he leans to his right, I just whip a hand over and follow him because I'm following the line of whatever his language, his body speaks. If he bends down, I meet him. Like all of us will do that. They may not have a name for it, but we all do that in the science of fighting. When I used to fight Chuck, trying to fight him and study him at the same time was very difficult because he was whipping my backside. So just trying to fight and fight for your life is what I used to call it when I used to fight Chuck. And people said, how do you like fighting Chuck? I said, it's like fighting for your life when you're out there fighting that man. And so I learned a lot from being in front of him. We were in front of each other a lot.
Well, we fought a lot.
You know, the interesting thing here between what you both are saying is that Lee refers to that through a 3-idea process. You guys do it because it's instinctual. Some people don't understand what they're looking at, but what you're doing, you know exactly. He referred it to the one that initiates the idea. So you come up and you're thinking of, I'm going to involved with a fight. The second person is that adventitious, which is somebody from the outside, ask you that question. And then finally, the last one is factitious, where you actually formulate your own response based on the other two. So the 3-part comes together. That's just analysis that I got from his statements, his writings, and actually his personal words that he was using. Both of you gentlemen, we have to salute your time and your duty and what you gave to this country as in the military. We're honored and we thank you for that. Both of you are from the Marines, am I correct?
Right.
Yeah, that's right. So you both know what it means to be a part of a very special elite group of individuals. There's a lot of structure. There's a lot of discipline that goes into it. Do you find that to be beneficial, that training to be beneficial to help you to do the transition to the martial arts or the martial science?
I don't, absolutely, sure. Yeah, the discipline, if you got through boot camp alive, then you were a Marine. And nobody can ever take that away from you, because that was one of the most difficult things that anybody had ever done at that age, was just getting through boot camp. So it taught you to pay attention and absorb what you needed to. How old were you when you went in the Corps, Steve?
I was 18.
18, and you were in for how long?
6 years, 8 months.
6 years. All right, so you got out at 24 years old, right? Because yeah, you were older when you got out, younger when you went in. I went in at 20 and got out at 22. I was in during the Korean War, and it was we've talked about this. I was actually went through selective service, drafted, in other words. And one of the big reasons I went in the Marine Corps was because they promised to get me out of Chicago and send me to San Diego. If they had done it with the Army, I might have gone in the Army instead, because I wanted out of Chicago. And when they said San Diego, my ears went, "Hello, sir, over here, sir. I'll go." And I did. It was great. He was still in the Marine Corps when he started with us. I didn't know that. I knew he had been a Marine, but I thought he had been, but he was still actually active service at the time.
Sijo Muhammad, when you walked into the school, you met, obviously, you had, in a previous conversation with me, you had met Mr. Inosanto. You obviously saw Mr. Sullivan and others. What was the thing that attracted you to American Kenpo?
Well, I think the hand movements that they were making, I had never seen hand flash out and move in the manner in which they were doing it. When I saw them do something like leaping crane or fire, thunder and hammer or something like that, I had never seen that. And remember, I told you I had taken some karate called Goju in Okinawa. And I had made brown belt, but I didn't know the basics. So when I went into their school, I saw these guys moving and shifting around and fighting. I said, man, I really don't know how to do karate. So I never brought my brown belt out of the vehicle, and I never told them that I took karate. I just started all over again under Daniel.
Right. That astounds me that you could be a brown belt in a system and not know the basics. Wow. Where did they start you? How did they train you? What kind of training is that?
Well, they didn't, because I was in the field. I would be in the field for a month or longer, depending on where we go to the Philippines or where we went to, actually, because I was a grunt. So when I came back to Okinawa from where we went to train, I may have 2 weeks there. So I have other duties. So when I got there, I may have had 3 lessons out of that 2 weeks. Then I'd be gone again for another month, 2 months. But because I was paying them, they would promote me. But I never learned the basics. So
Well, see, that's kind of the problem that you had with us, because when you got into it, you started and you got your basics, but when it came to the sophistication of some of the techniques, you got so good at freestyle fighting that you were beating up all of our brown belts. So what can we do? We couldn't have a white belt beating up all of our brown belts. We had to make you a brown belt. And you became a brown belt. We're still not the sophistication of many of the techniques. The basics were there, but the techniques weren't. So then you start beating up our brown belts, and I'm sorry, our black belts as a brown belt. So what can we do? We promoted a black belt. And you got there without getting a lot of the stuff that you should have gotten along the way. As a matter of fact, at one point, I understand that you had to hire Chuck Boyd to come down to your dojo to teach the guys escape techniques.
That's right.
But you know, it's so fantastic that you had that insight, that you said, you know what, I didn't get that. Let's bring somebody in who has got it. And you did. And Chuck Boyd, of course, has got it.
Can we make a distinction between techniques and basics?
Sure.
I'm gonna presume that Sijo Muhammad had a good command of basics, how to block, how to punch, how to kick.
Yes.
The question was, did he know how to do, say, 5 swords or leaping crane? Is it essential? Here's the question then, which takes us back to the simplistic direct response. Is it that important to understand the material of techniques? Either gentleman can answer that one for me.
Well, yes and no. It teaches you all your weapons. It gives you all your targets. It gives you the juxtapositioning. It gives you everything you need to do these things. It gives you a flow of motion. And they're just another tool, because if you think they're going to actually work as they are in the dojo on the street, you got another thing coming.
Your thoughts there, Sijo?
Yeah, that's true. That's why I have what you call reading the language of the body. When I punch at someone, he speaks a language. He's going to either go back, left, right, or he's going to duck and come forward. The brain has the ability to read that language if you understand that that ability is there. And it is there. That's how boxers, they time the opponent. Because if he throws a punch with the right hand, which is straight, he can throw a left hook because the head is supposed to be there. But if the head is not there, then the brain is quick enough in thought that when I throw a punch at the face and he dropped down, the brain is quick enough to see that drop, and you should be able to hit that target. Because when you look at a boxer, he throws a punch to the head, then he hooks to the head, but the guy dropped. So he missed the head, or the guy leaned back when he missed the head. You have the ability to what I call brain sight. If I shoot something at you, a front hand, and you step back, I noticed that you step back, I'll move right, left, and fire at you again. If you lean over to the left side, because I use what we call ambidextrous fighting. If you move to I punch with my right and you move to my left, I just step the right foot forward and whip a left hand towards your face. So I'm reading the language. It doesn't matter where you go. I have the ability to read that language through what I call brain sight. And brain sight is fast.
I have a question. Steve. Well, all right, this basically this does. Steve, you were a police officer with the what, LA County Sheriff's Department?
Yes, sir.
LA County, right. And that was what, 23 years?
I retired 27 years. I was with him 27 years.
Like 27 years. Okay. Now, in your time on the street, except for when things were already going on and maybe you joined a melee, a bar fight or whatever, so you just had to join in. When it was one-on-one, you and another guy, how many times did you allow somebody to throw on you before you initiated? In other words, how many times did you preempt a strike as opposed to somebody throwing on you? If you could just kind of give us a balance.
Well, it depends on, I guess, the situation that's set up. If I'm intended to engage him, the minute I get within engaging distance, I will engage him. But
in other words, preempt, you're supposed to strike.
That's right.
That's right. That's right. Let's talk about that. Really. I mean, I've been talking about the preemptive strike for so many years. I've been telling people, my first rule of self-defense is very simple. You don't get hit. And you do whatever you have to not get hit, because when you get hit, you know how devastating that one punch in the face, square in the face, and basically it could be over for
That's
you.
Right.
So if you get that punch in on him and it's over for him, you get to go home. He gets to wait for the ambulance. So
right.
You would say that if possible, you would strike first in almost every case where you know something's gonna come down.
That's right.
Hello, thank you.
I tell them when they approach me that when they start to approach me, I'll tell them, whoa, stop right there. He says, what's the matter? Are you afraid? I said, just careful. If you stay there, you can't touch me. I can't touch you. But the minute you get close enough to me, I become nervous with that. And there's something that may happen if you get that close to me. And so I don't say anything else after that time. If he talked to me and I see him moving a little bit every time he talked, the minute he get within distance for me to strike him, I will put hands on him, hands and feet if necessary.
It's funny you bring that up. You bring that up. Mr. Parker calls that in the 4 sections of out of range, in range, contact penetration, contact manipulation, which you're basically, so you're going to get it right up to the line. And if we get 1 more inch into that, then we got a problem. Correct? That's when Chuck Sullivan's thought process, if we're going to get it on, let's get it all the way on and strike at that point, because we don't know what's going to happen. It's not a predictable outcome like a tournament, which you both have been in. You were very successful at that, Sijo, but that was under control with rules and officials. You didn't have to worry about a third person or 10 other people jumping in to the fray on your back. And with all due respect, I mean, Mr. Parker at his height, at the best he was possibly could be, if 10 guys jumped on top of him, I think he'd be hard pressed to be able to get them all off him at the same time. He'd be fighting like crazy, biting, scratching, doing whatever. But in his case, he was a pretty badass kind of guy. So he would have seen that coming, I think, because as both of you have experienced, your intuitiveness, it says reading your opponent, knowing something is not right, and that sense is taking over. And that is just something inherently in your DNA.
I have another question for Steve. Steve, of all the fights that you were in on the street, I mean, for real, absolutely, how many times did you headbutt somebody?
I'm trying to think because I didn't.
You didn't?
Why he looks so good. Look at him. I mean, he looks great.
How many times would you have been in a position to do that? But that was a tool you didn't have. Because Ed Parker he put that into the system. You know how effective a headbutt is? You know how effective a headbutt is. Very effective. Extremely effective. And it's not even in well, it is in our system because I put it in there. I put it in there because I learned about it through people. See, it was a cultural thing. They don't headbutt in Hawaii. They just don't do that. It's not in their vocabulary. So he never taught us that. Well, I've seen it. I know what it is, and it's really a British Isle thing. Scotland, Ireland, England, they have, it's called the glass cow kiss. So they do it over there just automatically. You get close to bam, and you get headbutted. So it's in our system. Think about it. You might want to put it in yours too.
I have
play
a
around with it
for both
sometime.
of you then. I have a question. So we're going to foundation. When Parker created the Kenpo system, he was teaching something to somebody that had no experience in fighting, correct?
Basically, sure.
Okay, so a person walking in is naive, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so you come in there and you're now being exposed to a organized system of dirty fighting, as you had quoted saying, Mr. Parker
Right.
used. The foundation, if you don't have a foundation though, how can you engage in a fight? You're going to have
Of
to
course
be
you gotta
just
have a foundation.
instinctual.
Sure. Starts with the stance.
Yeah,
Just
well,
like in growing up and you know, being born, and what's the first thing you do? You crawl before you can stand. Then you stand to walk, and you learn how to walk to run. So it's the same thing with the art. I mean, you learn how to stand first, then you learn how to move within that stance, stabilizing your base, and yet having mobility. That's what the neutral goal is all about, giving you stability and mobility.
Mr. Muhammad, on your structure, you came up through the ranks under Mr. Sullivan, and you took it to a certain level. When did you decide that you wanted to focus more on the actual fighting, tournament and / real life confrontations?
Well, when I went to Grand Master Sullivan school, I went there because I wanted to. I had seen him come over to the West LA school where I was with Danny and Asanto. And I had never seen a man move that was my height and my size like he was moving, in the proficiency in which he could move with. That interested me. So I went over and asked him if I could be transferred to his school. He looked at me and said, "Steve, you don't have to transfer. You can just come over." Because
you know, West LA had a bunch of giants. Remember that? Tom Kelly, Bob Cook. Oh my God! Everybody was about a head taller than we were.
That's right.
Over there.
And
they fought in their way, and you're right. I mean, you couldn't fight their way. So when you saw us, we were more like normal-sized people instead of giants. You looked at it and said, "Yeah, that I could do." I remember that. I remember you telling me that, and that's why you came down to the Crenshaw School.
Let me ask you this: you both just made a comment, large gentlemen. What did they do different that couldn't be applicable to you?
Everything.
Well, give me some examples. I'm sorry. Besides size, obviously you had agility, a greater speed.
That's right.
The ability to avoid, you know, because these gentlemen are large. They generally weren't as quick or as fast or as agile as you.
Well, we had to play on that, of course.
Okay.
We had to play on that. I mean, we had. All right. I'll use a quote from boxing and from Muhammad Ali: "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." I mean, my philosophy was, if they can't catch me, they can't hurt me. So I would be darting all around the place while they'd be trying to get me, big lumbering guys, and I'd be off to the side of them. They didn't have to turn. Well, where is he now? And then when I felt I had an opportunity, I would go get him, and I'd get out of there like right now. I couldn't stand there and swap blows with him. I had to get in there and hit him hard, and then get out again. And of course, occasionally that didn't work.
In Sijo Muhammad's case, as a police officer, you're confronted with some large people. Is that when you usually call for backup?
You know, when I was working with the county, I worked East LA. So I was dealing with a lot of Mexican brothers and sisters over in East LA. And we were kind of like what you call undercover at that time. And I found that I could fight, and I could fight well, but I wasn't generating the kind of power that I needed. And I call it 3 to 5. You take somebody out in 3 to 5 seconds, and if you can't, you in a fight. So I got hit in the head with a brick while I was over there working. Somebody threw a brick off of a building out of about 300 people and hit me. I knew I was supposed to get out of East LA at that time. You know,
oh my!
But after being, I was out on medical leave, and I was out for about 3 months on medical leave. And while I was out, I said, "Man, I got the impact when I hit with my hand." I have to be strong with my feet. And I have to develop a way that every time I touch them, I hurt them. So I started developing what I call torquing power. And I've learned how to put 5 torques in one strike by using the shoulders, waist, hips, and fist. But when I torque, I use 2 torques in the hand. So when I hit, I torque it into the movement, torque it into the movement with a snap of the body. Boom, when I hit. And I try to ram it into them like taking a 2x4 and ramming it into their face or into their chest. And from developing that science, and I've developed the science, like I said, of being able to hit with both hands equally. And I said, there is no right and left in fighting. There's only fighting. So you have to develop both sides to be equal with each other. And when I got back to East LA, when I went back on duty again, I found that the first time I hit hard because I did it like a finger flick to the face and cracked him on the jaw. Finger flick, boom! And I hit him on the lower jaw and jammed it back up into I guess into the joints that held it there. And he screamed and fell back on the ground when I hit him. And I'm thinking, man, that's the way to hit. But not only there, I started hitting in the sternum area. I started learning how to attack the body, but attack it with power when I hit. Everywhere I hit you, I said, I'm going to hurt him. It doesn't matter whether he throw a punch, I check the arm, boom, and hit the bone on the arm. Doesn't matter where I hit the shoulder. Anywhere in the body there was a bone, which I call bone on bone. I learned how to hurt my opponent, not just hit him, but hurt him every time I laid hands on him, hand to feet. So that is what I teach now, that type of principle in fighting. Is that,
how does that rotation go, sir? Do you mind me asking?
Say it again.
The principle you said there's 5 rotations, correct?
That's right. You use the shoulders, the waist, the hips, and there's 2 torques in the hand. And those torques in the hand, when I get ready to hit, depending on the angle, if I'm going to hit up into the body this way, I place the palm down so that when I turn it, at point of impact, I send it. So when you hit something, it's hit, send at the same time. But the whole body must connect with that at the same time in which you strike. So when you strike, boom, the whole body make a twisting type movement, which I call torque. And I place the foot at an angle this way. So when I torque and send it with the right hand, this is my left foot. I put the left foot out and I drop it. As I drop it, I send the body into my opponent with the right hand. But it's always a backhand. Very seldom do I shoot a front hand other than a jab type movement. Every time I check, say I check with my left hand, my right foot is back. I check with my left hand, cross angle is what I call it. I move the right foot forward, boom, and hammer him with the left hand, which is a reverse punch. Almost every punch that I do, other than the jab, I'll manipulate it through my feet, which I call footwork in the science of fighting. And it's amazing that more people haven't done that, but there are probably more people now. I don't see them like I used to, where, like I think in Kenpo, I didn't learn that Kenpo was a strong side science until who told me? I think it was Bleecker or someone told me. He said, no. He says, Kenpo is a right side fighter. Why do you always move from left to right? I said, because there is no left or right in fighting. There's only fighting. What you can do on the right, you can do on the left. And what you can do on the left, you can do on the right. So I started teaching techniques, both right side and left side. If I can do 5 swords right, I can do 5 swords left. But I stopped doing that type of technique and went to what you call reading the language of the body. And the body does speak a language when you fight it. If you can read it, and the speed of thought says that you have the ability. If you hear this in a traffic accident, everybody says what? Everything slows down. Now, do you have that ability? It appears to slow down, not slow down, but it appears to slow down. do you have that ability in the sense of fighting to use that same ability in a car accident? Do you have that same ability in fighting? Can you make movements appear slow in fighting? And if so, does it give you any type of advantage, or can you actually do that? I say, yes, you can. And I said, because it happened to me in a tournament when I was fighting as a young man in a tournament at the internationals. This guy threw a punch at me. And when he threw a punch, I went like I was going to check it. And I call this a palm block, not an inward block. This is an inward block. And when you turn it over and attack the arm, I call that a palm block. So I tried to do what I call a palm block. And the punch came later and hit me in the face. And I moved away from it. And I go, damn, how come I didn't block that? And Donnie Williams said, and I was looking like I was surprised, like he said, you didn't block that punch, fool. You know, and we both started laughing. And I said, why didn't I block it? And it was because I've been used to seeing the punch when it got close to the face, so I was able to check it. This time I saw it at the initiation of the movement, and I thought it was here, and it was still back there. So I did that block, and the hand hit me in the face. So with that, I start thinking, man, if I have the ability to pick it up back there, then I have an advantage over this guy. Because if he throws a punch, I can actually step inside and throw a punch at him. Because his punch is coming this way, I can step inside, throw it, and follow it up. I start doing that. I had no name for it and no understanding as to how I could do that until I started thinking about people talking about traffic accidents and being able to make movements appear slow. If you can do it at a time that there is danger, isn't fighting a dangerous method of fighting? I mean, a dangerous method. So if you can use it in a car accident, you can also use it in the science of fighting by seeing that weapon at an earlier stage than you do at a later stage. And if you can manipulate and move around a lot of things that you couldn't normally do because you see it out there rather than here. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. I have one comment and one question. The comment is, as Lee refers that as being in the moment, not being results oriented, but being in the flow. Great athletes always say when they're in that zone, they're like, is just happy, natural, and everything is irrelevant but what they're engaged in. And I think that's sort of touching upon what you're saying. My question though is this: as you refer to the application with your hands and your fighting and the torquing, can that also, that principle, can that also be applied to a kick?
Oh yes, there is no difference. You have the ability to use your hand and feet equally in movements. There are some angles that they cannot take, but you have the ability to use that, because in fighting, there have been times that I shoot a front hand and a backhand, that dude would lean back, whack, and I would kick him. But you have to have what I call brain sight in order to see that. Even what you're talking about, I can't speak that language. I can speak the language of fighting, but every time you move, doesn't matter where you move, I can shoot a front hand at you and you lean back, whack, I'll kick your leg. How did I know that leg was there? It's because of what I call brain sight. I'm seeing you from head to toe. I will not get at a position in fighting you where I cannot see you from head to toe. I call that 12-inch fighting science, where I'm going to stay, I'm going to keep you at 12 inches. From 12 inches from me, what I call chest to chest. I can see your feet, I can see your head. If I can see your feet and your head, there's no movement that you cannot make that I cannot pick up. And that's what I call brain sight. But you have to have weapons, or either, well, how can I put this? When you're in close on the opponent at 12 inches, you must be throwing weapons at your opponent. You don't give him a chance to do anything, but if he does get one in there, you must have the distance to be able to see that movement that is coming and be able to counter. I don't do defense in the sense of defense in the manner in which people talk of defense. My offense and counter offense is my defense. When Bruce said he used a water language, I use that same language, but I use that language of seeking and conforming, which means to flow, shift, change, and create, which is adaptability. And the brain will conform to the information in which you are receiving or developing. And it will create from that information a science for fighting, because that is what I work at all the time, not sometimes. I never stop thinking about how to improve in fighting and how to teach a student to fight better. That's in my head. That's just my, like you say, DNA. That's my DNA now for the science of fighting. And I give credit to my great Grand Master, because I had a lot of the stuff that I speak on now, even though he may not use the same language, I'm using information that I actually got from him all the time I was fighting with him. And I always say I was fighting for my life when I was fighting.
Well, isn't that what it's about? I mean, this is not a game. You have played the game in the martial arts, a tournament scene. You guys, both of you, competed when there wasn't a lot of safety protection at all advocated. It was real deal. Mr. Sullivan, we just heard what Sijo Muhammad was talking about, the inherent use of being in the moment, the flow, learning how to react and be in directness. How do you use those same principles in your teaching?
Well, you know, that's something you could talk about, but I don't know if you can teach it. I think that has to come from the individual. You can give them the principles and the concepts, and from then on, it's up to him or her. They're going to have to do it on their. I don't think that's something you can actually teach somebody to do. They get it through practical experience, mostly. And if Sijo Muhammad hadn't been doing what he's doing all these years, he wouldn't be able to articulate it that well either. You know, it's just something that he can do, and I concur with everything he says. Every now and then, I'm gonna, Steve, is it okay if I tell him the time I knock you out?
Don't tell him.
Oh my gosh. Oh, inquiring minds would love to know.
Here's what happened. Steve Sanders, Muhammad Sanders at the time, could get gone before Quick could get ready. I mean, this guy would you'd blink and he'd be one place, and then you blink, he'd be another place. I mean, in the blink of an eye, the man could move so fast, and he had this instinct about everybody he fought. When you start to move on him, he would always be just that far ahead of you, always that far away. Well, fighting as much as we did, and we fought every Tuesday and Thursday night for years, right. Things were bound to happen. Something was bound to happen, and one night it did. One night I decided I was going to catch him. I don't care if he ran out the door. If he circled around, because I knew he was going to circle to my right, his left. I knew that, but I was going to cut him off in the pass if I had to. I just made up my mind. I was going to catch him, and like I say, I don't care how far he ran. Well, unfortunately, he didn't run at all, and I leapt through with a straight punch. And it was unintentional, Steve. You know, I trapped his foot with mine. I stepped on his foot. Well, I expected him to be 3 yards beyond me at the time that I threw the punch, and I caught him like right here instead of out there. I mean, and I hit him so hard that his tooth came through his lower part of the lip, and it cut my knuckle. That's how hard I had to grab him because I could see his eyes rolling around like gumballs, and he finally said, "Oh my God, are you all right?" And I grabbed, and I hugged him and holding him up, and he finally came around and he says, "My tooth is loose." I said, "Don't let it come out. Don't let it come out. Just keep biting it down." And he went to the dentist the next day, and the dentist said, "That was the best advice you ever got." He says, "Because if it had come out, you'd have to get you a false one." But he says, biting it down, it will reseat itself. So if you ever bust anybody in the mouth to who you care about, and you loosen their teeth, don't let them come out. Now,
I want to interject just for 1 second before you say anything. I'm going to quote Sun Tzu and Miyamoto. Treachery is everything, and the art of war is deception. In both cases, you applied that. That's quite
but unintentionally. Unintentionally. I didn't mean to, for God's sake. Now,
hey, it played out, sir. That's all that mattered.
Here's the upshot. We're freestyling. This is like, I think, 2 weeks later to the night. And we're freestyling. and I get a hold of him and I turn him and I'm going to be able to hit him in the kidneys. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm going to hit Steve Muhammad, Steve Sanders at the time. I'm going to hit him 2 times in 2 weeks. This is incredible. When a foot came sneaking up, I didn't see it, my blind zeb zone. It caught me under the chin and lifted me off the floor. And so help me, there wasn't enough room between us to slip a piece of paper. How he got that foot between us, and he had his back to me, and he caught me in the, and if my tongue had been between my teeth, I'd be showing my baby friend.
Lord. Oh my
He caught me, so I mean to tell you, and he said it wasn't payback. And I believe it.
You know what?
It wasn't.
Sijo is a very gifted man. There is no question.
Oh my God, yes, indeed.
He is very gifted in many ways, and wisdom is there. Is just, you know, it's based on the knowledge in his life experiences, and he's sharing that with us. I think it's interesting. You use the reading of the opponent. What was the term you used with your head that you were using here? Not
Brain sight.
Brain sight. You know, it's funny that you said that. One of the greatest warriors, Miyamoto Musashi, said, perceive that which cannot be seen with the eye. Perceive that which cannot be seen with the eye. In other words, what you're professing to, sir, is deeper than just these guys. We've had this conversation with the eye seeing, but not recognizing the process.
You know, Paul, in fighting, I've done this for so long now. I practice every day on the movements in which I'm talking about now. And I find that if I can't see it, if I can't use what I call brain sight, the brain has to see. And if it doesn't see it, it can't respond to it. So whenever something comes at me, you throw a kick, I can either take it inside or I can take it outside. But the whole body functions as one unit to get you in place to do whatever you're getting ready to do. But in order for you to do that, you must see it. When Chuck threw punches at me, if I didn't block them or check them in some way, I got hit. So I call that brain sight. You must be able to see. But at the same time, I can throw a front hand and see where you place your hand to block that front hand. If you put both hands up, I know then to shoot down into the groin, or throw a punch into the groin, or hook it into the body. Just from the movement that you make when I see you, the speed of thought is so great. And if you use that speed of thought, you can see any movement that your opponent is able to make, any counter movement that he makes. It doesn't matter how quick he is. And I keep saying to everyone, you have the ability to make movements appear slow. They're not slow, but appear slow. When you can get into that and understand that that ability is there, even when I say car accident, that ability is there. How do you pull that ability into your fighting science when you're fighting? And you can absolutely do that. I'm teaching my students now. You should see my son. I have a son. He is much, much better than I was at the stage. He's 25 now. He's much, much better than what I was at the stage in which he is now. And he didn't learn right away. He's now just starting 25 years later. He's only been taking karate for about 12 or 13 years. He's beginning to see things that he said, Pops, man, I can see things and counter them. He says, I can see the movement on the way, whether it's a foot or whether it's a hand. I can see it on the way. And my brain immediately set up a counter for that as it's coming. And you can do that. But you have to really study and understand the capabilities of the mind. There is no limitations to what you can accomplish if you put the mind in that direction, because it will create and adapt in the direction in which you want it to go. I'm a fighter, and I used to love to fight. I still do, even at 81. Don't say that to my teacher now.
I'm going to say you two gentlemen exemplify what a martial artist should always remember, and that is conditioning is so paramount to your training, not just mental, but physical. And it's obvious. Look at both of you, incredible physical condition, most people are laying in a bed eating chocolate or something. And you guys are out there living life, embracing it, and it is inspirational to young men, both starting in the martial arts and even guys like me that have been around a little bit. I'm thinking, man, after watching these guys, you know, Paul, put the donut down and get on the treadmill over there and do some sit-ups. My goodness, it seems that I'm going to address that issue of speed. It's amazing because Parker had a great take on that. See, most people don't recognize the genius of Ed Parker. He actually was a great catalyst for so many martial artists, but he had 3 parts that he called it. One was called perceptual speed, where the quickness of the senses in monitoring the stimulus that they receive, obviously what you have in here in your head. The second thing is the mental speed, which is the quickness of the mind to select appropriate movements, as you would say, Sijo. And finally, physical speed. That is the quickness of the physical movement. In other words, in response to the stimulus. You think of all 3 of that. I mean, this is happening like this. Okay, is inherent to you 2 gentlemen. I mean, if push comes to shove, it's like this. You call on that because 1, you're physically in condition. 2, you're mentally prepared. Your training takes over, and that is the key. Because if you don't have that, you can't respond like that. You're going to be on the ground, and we know what that quote is, right, Chuck? He who hesitates meditates, but usually it's in the morgue.
Yeah. Yep.
So we're okay. So let's address now. We have a foundation thing. Both of you have established that and gone down that path. And I believe everybody that's in this world has some kind of foundation of experiences, whether they've trained in the martial arts or not. I always liked what Mr. Parker did when he would do seminars, and then later some of the students that I trained with, that I saw, and I was in seminars, specifically the late Senior Master of the Arts, Frank Trejo. He would use the analogies and metaphors of actual things that we do, reaching out for the hand, grabbing the money, coming back, looking at it, no money, it's fake, throwing it down. And they would use the principle as an everyday activity and say a person comes up behind you, you reach out, you close your fist, you hit him with backward elbow, and now you executed a technique. It's just learning the language of American Kenpo as Ed Parker wrote it. And he was one to make it so sophisticated, yet break it down to be so simplistic. And in the times I was with Mr. Parker and around Trejo as well, he would always refer to that this was the system that he came up with, addressing all the possible scenarios that we could have with different weapons, different targets, different combination responses and such. You do that well, Mr. Sullivan, taking that and looking at that collectively. But Parker also would say, you take what is necessary for yourself and you effectively apply it. That is what we see with Sijo Muhammad, taking and using and refining it for actual combat. A young student coming in is going to say, I don't know anything about fighting, but I'm just tired of getting beat up. Prevent that. And the first lesson probably when they walk in to spend some time with you, Sijo, or you, Mr. Sullivan, is you instill some confidence in them to believe in themselves. So this first part here has control of the situation so that when they're in that ring of life and confrontational, they'll know how to respond. And Sijo, I don't know if he told you this lesson, but he's told it to me. The first one is run. Yeah, otherwise, get it on, dude, right there. So now let's look at a comparison and contrast between Ed Parker and Bruce Lee. Obviously, Bruce Lee had some training over in Hong Kong, Wing Chun, which is very directional. It's usually training in a straight horse stance, using a trapping and parrying and checking and multiple strikes and whatnot. You would probably know this better, Sijo, because you spent time with Bruce. But then he incorporated later, when he went to America, Western boxing. And he was also a very talented dancer. So he had fluid, he had rhythm, he had timing. He started to apply that. And then he used his brother's system of fencing, which expanded his mind. So they come together. Ed Parker comes together. Bruce Lee comes together. Why don't you tell us about that, Chuck? Your understanding of how Parker expanded Kenpo, and he was, and then people like Bruce Lee were drawn to him to answer that. I'm gonna let you talk about it.
Well, first of all, to my knowledge, Bruce Lee and Ed Parker never really did much more than just exchange ideas. I don't think they ever actually got down into specifics that much. Their styles were so different. Their body styles were so different. Ed Parker was he was a huge man, and he could move in a way that nobody else his size I've seen move really, as far as like moving his body weight from one place to another. He was incredible at doing that, and he had extremely fast hands. And I think Ed Parker learned early on that in order to be really fast, you have to eliminate all of the extraneous movement that there are, that you possibly can. It's going directly like point of origin, and he just had a great ability to move his body around. Bruce, of course, was very deceptive for his size. The man didn't look like, he looked like a strong wind could blow him away. But at the same time, he was extremely powerful. But that's all he did. Now, you got to remember, that was his quest in life, was to become a movie star using the martial arts. And so he had to be on top of his game at all times with the martial arts. And the more he did it, and that's all he did. I mean, he didn't work for a living, quote, he didn't have a day job like Steve and I. And I think that's the only thing that saved me from artificial parts. Because if I hadn't had that ability to train all day, I would have worn myself out too. Knees, shoulders, ankles, I mean, hips. Oh my God. Almost everybody's got a hip replacement that was in the art at the time when they were able to practice all day long. So Ed and Bruce were so different in their approach. I would love to have been able to work out with Bruce, but I never felt the necessity. I had the abilities to work out with anybody in the world. Back in the day, I knew them all, and I knew what they did, and I could have gone with anybody. And when I saw Bruce, I thought that was very interesting. I told you about how he changed my life by making me examine things that I had never even thought of examining before. The system itself. I never thought to tear it apart and examine it until he came up with what he did the night that I met him. And he had a profound difference made a profound difference in my life, because since that time, I've always questioned everything, just as a natural course of action. I don't just
Mr. Parker was good with that too. He used the Socratic method all the time when I was around him, actually from his formal training of education, college, university, degrees and whatnot. One of the things he came up was what you said is the 3 points of view. Your point of view, my point of view, and Steve is watching us. And then he interjects and gives you a thought and me the thought, and then we create our thought. So
right.
I think that's important because what Lee was doing was to help self-examination to be the best that you possibly could be, not to be conformist, because you look at all the different martial arts, they all have strengths within them, yet they also have weaknesses. Parker saw the collection of all these arts and said, why can't we do this? Lee did the same thing, but he trimmed it down to an essential essence of what was necessary for him in his own style. And he called that Jeet Kune. It was a personalization. Plus, he also interweaved it with his philosophy from his Eastern background, which is strong. You can use those metaphors. I think one of the best one we've always heard is be water, my friend, which if you think about it, and this is something that Mr. Muhammad had brought up earlier, instead of forcing the issue, he could read the opponent and then he responded in accordance. Well, you and I and Steve are there, we're walking along. Well, no, Steve's in the boat. this is how it is. Steve's going to flow with the boat because you know what? He's a very smart man. He is going to go the least resistance because it will take him on his natural course to where it is. Chuck and Paul show up and Chuck says, okay, let's go in, Paul. And I swim in, but I'm fighting it the whole time, trying to go up the stream. It's not working for me. And you say, heck, what's going on? And then you flow as well. So the flow factor there goes into it. When you think about it, Lee was saying, adapt that what is necessary for yourself to be the best you possibly can be, because not everything's going to work. Parker, on the other hand, would say, okay, hey, I got a toolbox and I got all these tools in here. And those tools, when I need it, I will be able to pull it out. Did you need it on a regular basis? Probably not. So I truly believe both you gentlemen, as a foundational thing, have come from the Parker system of American Kenpo. Great foundation, solid there, but on your path, you've been guided following this principle of JKD without either intentionally doing it or unintentionally, because as you said, it's more effective. It's the way I think. And in the books that I look at, Mr. Parker, I truly believe he was going back to the early beginnings of the Kenpo system with his thought process with variable expansion, rearrangement concept, the 8 considerations, the web of knowledge, etc., the universal pattern. These are just how he identified something, but he didn't want you to get so caught up in it that you would like, well, analysis causes paralysis and I want to pull my hair out kind of thing. The real deal. I mean, I'll tell you right now, Steve, if he couldn't speak because his mouth is, because the tooth is loose, I guarantee you when he still punches you in the face, that still is a punch in English or in Japanese or Chinese or whatever it is. In your case, it's knockout time. Boom, and you're gone. So that's really the best of both worlds. And I think these two men came along at a very pivotal time, which is so important because it gave both of you a lesson that became where you are today. And we're grateful for that. So that's my take on the two. And not one's wrong or not right. As I said earlier in part 1, I look at Mr. Parker as taking and creating the ultimate buffet. One day, Mr. Muhammad says, we're going to have Chinese food. The next day, Mr. Sullivan says, we're going to have Italian food. And Paul comes along and says, well, gee whiz, I don't know, maybe American food. But we go to the Ed Parker buffet. And what do we see? Everything, the greatest opportunity there. And then if you follow the Lee premise, Mr. Muhammad says, I'm going to have Chinese still. He goes and gets the Chinese. Mr. Sullivan goes over and he gets what he wants. And I get what I want. What we've done was we personalized what is for us, what we needed that day to appropriately respond. Okay, so if you have a confrontation like Mr. Muhammad had, and you learn how to strike because he's following, he's reading the body, great. If you have a situation like Mr. Sullivan, he sits there and he finger pokes right in or he hits him with the headbutt, bingo. Is that his go-to moves? I don't know. It depends on the circumstances. So that's my analogy on what I'm seeing here. And I think it's worthy of us to expand on this. So Mr. Sullivan, I'm gonna have you talk about the time you did meet Bruce Lee at the Ed Parker School. And then I'm gonna ask Mr. Muhammad to talk about that as well.
Okay, well, when Ed Parker was introducing Bruce into the entertainment industry, Bruce was like his shadow. He went with him everywhere. And they were together for many days at a time, and he was out there introducing him. And he came to the studio one night and we were in the class, and after the class, we're walking out from the back with our shoes, everything in hand, and he met us midway. It was Dan Hedesano, Dave Hebler, myself. I think there may have been one other person. And he said, I want to introduce you guys to a hot young martial artist. This is Bruce Lee. Well, Ed got called to the phone and he had to leave. And then Bruce immediately took over the conversation, which was his ilk. And he says, well, he just got back from Hong Kong. And we're like, oh, Hong Kong, wow, the Mecca of martial arts. And we said, so what's it like in Hong Kong? He said, well, it's 95% commercial bullshit. And we went, whoa, come on, really? And he's like, yeah, you know. And then he's showing us his forearm. And I tell you, you couldn't put your fingernail into it. I mean, it was, my God, it was like a piece of metal, literally. Very, very impressive. And then he said something that really got our attention. He said, by the way, I was watching what you were doing earlier, and you did this, and he showed us something. And it looked like he had been in the class forever. He did it perfectly. And we said, yeah. He said, why were you doing that? We kind of like, what's the question? We were doing what Ed Parker was teaching. And he says, well, I just wondered because it was wrong. I remember looking at Dave Hedler, and he grew about 3 inches in height. And he looked at me like, you want him or should I take him? And I said, no, let's listen to what he has to say first. And we'll decide what to do. And anyhow, he said, oh, anyhow, what he told us was that the move that he was teaching us was really no good. And we had never heard that before, anybody. And it was really a lot of brass to come into somebody's school and tell the students that their instructor was teaching them something that was wrong. But he was right. That was the problem. Now,
what was the problem? What was the actual issue on?
Paul, I'll give you an example. The short hour block. It's worthless. It's useless. It's going to get you in more trouble than it's ever going to do you any good. All you can do is turn it around, and it's a whole different thing. But this short hour block, you're blocking with the radial nerve of your arm. You have no strength in that arm, or else somebody's just going to slap that aside and hit you in the head. It shouldn't be in the art, but it's in the art, and they're teaching it yet today. Why? And they'll tell you it's no good, but they're still teaching it. Well, it was something like that. And I thought at the time, well, okay. So the kid stood there. I call him a kid. He was 9 years younger than I at the time. That's a lot of life experience, 9 years. I was 30, he was 21. So I'm thinking of it as the kid. The kid picked out something that we were doing. You, Steve, myself, any instructor could go to any school in the world and watch what they're doing and pick something out that really isn't that good. Why? Because you're teaching a lot of things to a lot of people that they may be able to use. But not everything is going to be 100%. So he picked out something. And I thought to myself, driving home, I'm thinking to myself, how come the kid could do this and I can't? And
What's the thing you can't do? Let me
What's
interrupt you. What's the thing that you couldn't do?
Pick something out that was wrong.
I see. A creative, analytical thinking. Okay, great.
Right. And then all of a sudden I said to myself, how do you know you can't do it, you dummy? You never tried. Why didn't I try? Because I took everything that Ed Parker taught as gospel. It was 100% right. And that night it was proven to me that that wasn't the case. Nobody is infallible. He is not God. Therefore, I'm going to start looking at everything he teaches me and anybody else about anything. The man changed my life that night. He really did.
I will go to Mr. Muhammad in a second. Only problem I have is that when I remember being in Mr. Parker's presence, which is interesting, I use that collectively for Pasadena seminars. If somebody said, Mr. Parker, that won't work, that was a bad thing to do.
Right.
But it's okay to discuss it in this situation. Sijo Muhammad, first time you met Bruce Lee.
The first time I met Bruce Lee was at the Internationals. He and Chuck Sullivan, Chuck Norris was sitting together. And I was out fighting. And he had made a statement that, who is that guy? That guy have extremely fast hand and feet. So he came out to me and touched me on the shoulder. And when I turned around, he told me that I had extremely fast hand and feet. And we were standing there talking. And we talked for about, I guess, 3 or 4 minutes. And he got ready to walk away and he stopped and turned around. He said, do you know me? And I said, no, you look familiar. Because on Green Hornet, he was wearing the little thin black uniform that he wore. And he looked real thin. But in person, he was thin, but he was kind of thick in his suit. He appeared to be in real physical good condition. And so I didn't recognize him. And he said, Bruce Lee. I ran over to him and I grabbed him like I was a little child or something. And I'm jumping up and down with him, you know, like I'm so happy to meet him.
Was
You
he
know,
happy too?
I assume that he was, I'm not sure. But, later on, I was sitting waiting to go fight, and this guy bring me a note, and he said, "This came from Bruce Lee," you know. So he gave it to me, and there was a number on the paper that he gave to me. That's how I made contact with him. But I went and visit him because he asked me to come. He had like a little garage type school that he was using, I guess, for that day. I'm not sure where it was or whose school it was, but we went in there and we started training. And he was saying that this training is between you and I, you know. So I said, okay. I think I may have told this story maybe twice in my life. So I think I told you before, didn't I, Paul?
You told me something about how you worked out with him.
Right. And what I found out about Bruce, that people say he was fast. I would say that Bruce had uncanny timing in doing what he's doing. He wasn't that physically fast against someone, but he had what you call uncanny timing, and also he had good eyes to be able to see what he was going to hit or kick. Because you could drop and drop low. He could feint at you and you drop low. He could kick you to the face on your drop. That I call brain sight, because you, in order to counter something, the brain has to see it. If the eyes see it, only the eyes and the brain, and even though they see it at the same time, but if you don't understand, when the eyes see something, if you only see it with the eyes, there is a delay in responding to it. But if the brain and the eyes see at the same time, then you can respond at the same time. This may be something, you know, people, when I tell them that, it's something that I found to be true, that you have what you call brain sight. You can see, and you see with the brain. The eyes is the mirror to the brain. It reflects back everything that you see. When I see my teacher, Great Grand Master Chuck Sullivan, I recognize him not by the eyes, but through the eyes. I see, that's my teacher. That's Chuck Sullivan. If you close my eyes and I hear his voice, I can say, because the brain has recorded his voice, I can say, whoa, my teacher's around someplace, and I go and find him. I use those principles because over the years, I've learned that. So I say that Bruce had uncanny timing. He was not that fast. He asked me, how the hell do you get away from me so fast? You know, how when you get your hands near me, that your hands move in the manner in which they do, you know? I said, at the time, I didn't know about brain sight. I'd say, well, yeah, I just see you. You know, when I see you, I fight according to what I see. But I didn't have a name for it. And both of us, we didn't understand it. But I must have trained with Bruce for about, altogether, maybe about 15 times that I trained with him over the years. And then he told me that this is between you and I, Steve. And I kept it that way. I never said anything to anybody. Like I trained with Ark Wong. Most people don't know that I trained with Ark Wong for 5 years, taking bits and parts of Wing Chun from, because I couldn't get there like I could go to my school, which was Chuck Sullivan's school. I was there when the door was open. I was there to train with him. But with Bruce, like I said, he had uncanny timing in what he does. And he had ideas of fighting that, like when he spoke on water, when he would say like, fill the cup or something, I didn't quite understand that. But later on, he made a statement: be composed, but don't stand still. Be mobile, but don't move. Don't attack, strike. Hit your opponent on his first move. Move only to counter or attack. He told me that one day, and I thought to myself, Bruce is out of his damn mind. How are you going to stand still and don't move? But then I realized he didn't give me the answer, but you can stand still and have this mobile. And if this is mobile, it will move the body for you. But if you allow this to stand still, then nothing moves. No body, nothing on you will actually move. So I began to study that. It's like the use of water in dealing with him. He never explained how to use water. But as I began to grow and understand, I was trying to pick iron and steel and everything, wood, for my fighting science until I actually studied water one day. And it said, water is alive. And it was telling how if you play with this water, if you say something to the water that is negative, then it will, under a microscope, it will have distorted, it'll make something like flowers, but they'll be distorted. But if you say something like, I love you to water, then it would make flowers that are very beautiful. Under the scientific method of doing that, we've done that before. And that is true, that water is alive. But how you use it, like I say, in offense, I use water as seeking, because water seeks when it moves. And in defense, which I don't usually use the word defense, I use conform, because when water touches something, it conforms to that immediately. So I use seeking and conforming. I seek to get to you. If you throw something back at me, I conform to that, but I never stop seeking, even though I'm conforming as I seek, if you understand what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
That is the science in which I'm trying to teach now, that I seek and conform, which means my offense and my counter offense is seeking, my counter offense is conforming. So I have nothing that you call defense, in the sense of I'll block and then I'll throw a punch. I'll conform to that. As I do that block, I'm conforming by shooting the opposite hand. If you shoot it in such a way where I can't actually attack you from that, I conform to whatever movement that I have to conform to be able to use that language of water to get back to you. But I found that in using the language of water in my head, it conforms to everything. There's nothing that water touches that it cannot conform to. It has the ability to overcome all that's in its path. In my head, when I'm fighting, I have that same thought in my head when I'm fighting, that as I fight and you throw something, I'll check that move, hook that move, finger flip it, I fire on your face, hit you with an uppercut, depends on where your head, where your body means to or go. I will attack you according to those angles. That's what I got from him later on in life. Really, in the last 25 years, or maybe a little more, in the last 25 years of studying about water and the use of water, I understand it a lot better today than I did back then, because I didn't understand how you use water back then. But now I understand the language of water in the science of fighting. And I use that in my fighting science. That is one of the elements. I use distance, angles, timing, and targeting. And you must master those four in order to fight. And if you don't master them, because every time you need the proper distance to be able to get the proper power. You need the proper angle in order to hit with what I call angular power. You need the proper timing to make the weapon get to the target at the time in which you need to get there. Then you must target the target, not just hit it, but you target it. When I hit you in the face, I'm not hitting you in the face. Hell, I have a target on your face. If I hit you in the face, I'll get the proper angle, even though I may have to slap you across the face. That when I slap you across the face, your head will turn, because the brain says, protect your eyes, so it will turn. Or you poke far in the face, it'll lean back. The minute that your head moves back from there, I can either hit down into the body because your head is back. Because most of the time when you put your head back, you throw your hands up. That is a language. Or you turn your head to the side, or you drop it down or something. That is a language. And I could read that language as you make those movements. And because I can read them, I can attack that language. And my hands are always in a position where I can attack.
the reference that you're using, Lee is obviously influenced by Lao Tzu, okay, the creator of the Tao, and the use of the water example. Miyamoto says, do nothing that is of no use, which is what you're saying. I am not going to waste my energy. I'm going to be positive with my energy and respond in accordance to it. With Lao Tzu, he says that water is fluid, soft, and yielding. It will wear away a rock. Which is rigid and cannot yield. He said that finally that the other paradox is that what is soft is strong. You think about that. We use references. Western mind does. We'll say, oh, strong as an oak, a powerful oak, until the massive storm comes and shreds the darn oak to pieces, and it cannot compete with it. However, if you borrow from Lee, you'll say, be bamboo, flexible and fluid. And that's what you're saying with your example with water. It is fluid, it is moving, it is responding in accordance. The water as it flows down the river is that example I gave earlier. It goes down, it goes to a certain place, it hits the vegetation, it waters the vegetation, it evaporates, it goes back up into the clouds, it returns again as what? Rain. Rain then waters the plants again, and it flows back into the river, and the river continues. It's a cycle. So its fluidity is never in question. It is always growing. I think the thing that Lee uses is the idea of using some spiritual ideas for metaphors to help you understand why he tries to keep it simple, direct, effective. If you go to Mr. Sullivan, and in the Ed Parker system that came up, eventually it blossomed into 154 techniques, half a dozen forms, there's sets, whatnot. The business of Kenpo came into play. And then what happened, Mr. Sullivan reverting back to his foundation, his strengths of simplicity, directness, following along the same things that you're talking about, Sijo, he comes up with 55 techniques. 55 techniques. If I'm incorrect, sir, please correct me. 55 techniques, he says they're all there. What's not there? You don't need more than 55. You don't need less than 55. He incorporates the use of the headbutt. There's other things that he could probably expand on that. That's your teacher, and he has taught me that, the understanding of keeping it direct. Am I correct on that, sir?
Correct. You know, Bruce said also, don't try to be like me. You're not me. He'll give you certain principles and concepts to work on that'll make you better. I tell people all the time, if you're learning this or just for yourself, throw out about half of what I'm teaching you, take the other half that really resonates with you, really fits you, and work on that and get that as good as you can. Because there's no sense of working on things that you're never getting good at because they don't fit your body style or they don't fit your personality. However, if you're going to teach this art, then you have to have it all because you have to be able to pass it on to the next generation.
Yeah, but haven't you done that? Haven't
that?
you done that, sir? Haven't you done that? You're teaching your system, the IKCA.
Right.
You are teaching the 55 techniques that you find to be the most effective, direct application. All the tools are there that are necessary. Am I right?
That's true, but it can even be cut down from there for you individually.
I understand. Well, when you started in the Ed Parker system, you had a dozen techniques, maybe?
We didn't have but a handful.
Okay, and a few forms, correct?
Right.
Okay. What is the importance of forms in your system?
Just to remember the techniques.
Okay.
We only have one form. It's the master form. It includes it encompasses all of the techniques. And also, it has gone from 55 to 60 because we've instituted yellow belt for adults. Yellow belt was initially for children to get them in a double dose of basics. Well, a lot of schools, our member schools, started using the yellow belt for adults also. And they said it's so great because it does give them a double dose of basics. And therefore, they started instituting it. And we did also. So the system has actually expanded to 60 instead of 55 techniques. And these are the yellow belt techniques we borrowed right straight from Kenpo.
Let me ask you this. In your study, do you train with somebody as a student?
No, no. I I like what we have. I don't feel the need to. How much how much can I improve at 89 years old? I mean, how much more can I absorb, and how much more do I need?
That was a loaded question. I should have told you when I said, sorry about that. I love you, man. You know that.
No,
He's my Kenpo dad, Sijo. Sorry. Sometimes the sun
it's like a
gets
cup of water flowing.
belligerent.
You know, once it's full, whatever you put in, something's got to leave. My
Absolutely.
brain
Well,
can
that's
only absorb
actually
so much anymore.
that is actually one of the concepts that Lee says. You must empty the cup before you can fill it up. And you
That's
have
true.
to
Yeah.
adapt to that. I'm saying the vigilant instructor is the ever vigilant student, to borrow a line from Eastern philosophy. And what it is that I learn so much every time I'm in front of students that I work with, and it reinforces.
Oh, I learned as much from my students as I have from my instructors.
Right.
Absolutely.
Sijo Muhammad. Sijo Muhammad, do you teach any forms?
No, sir. Not for years. Since I've been here, 25 years I've been here. I don't teach any forms anymore.
Do you work instead of that? Do you just focus directly on combat? Correct.
Combat. That is correct.
Okay. I was analyzing the three basics of Mr. Parker's system. He had, obviously basics, techniques, freestyle. And when you get down to they all relate to one another. If you don't have your basics, how can you do your techniques? If you can't do your techniques, how could you apply the basics and the techniques in a freestyle context? I was looking at Mr. Parker's breakdown of freestyle. And freestyle, the first one out of the box is the form. No contact. One person against imaginary perfect scenario of fighting in an organized manner. So there it is. You have no contact and it's freestyling. Okay. When you add another person to it and you have no contact, you have the two-man set. You have slight contact, but it is again freestyle. Then we get into things that are teaching, which probably Sijo Muhammad deals with drills. So it would be light contact, learning that, medium contact, where you're starting to spar, and then full contact. And then the ultimate, which is really, I think both of you gentlemen exemplify, and this is really the essence of what you're about, your core, what you are to protect that is yourself and those that you train with. Full on street fighting, combat. This is the real deal thing. I think that's really important. I'm going to conclude this in just a moment. Is there any thoughts you would like to offer Sijo Muhammad before we close?
Would I like to offer?
Yes, sir. Any other thoughts of how you envision the continued progress and the ever changing system of the martial science?
Oh, yes, sir. I would say when I'm out someplace or even looking at TV, I see movements on that TV. I know it's a game and that these movements are all set up and planned, but can you actually actualize those movements in real time or in real life? And you can take that back and you can actually put them in, even when I'm trying to move with the children or something, which I can't do right now because I've hurt myself. But when I was able to do that, those things I would see, or I'd go to some school and I would see some child or some student do something, I would keep that in my head. I'm always looking for new ways of actually delivering stuff, even though I believe that I can come up with various movements, but it's nothing like seeing someone do something, because you look at the child when they're out there making movements, they can do some crazy stuff that can actually work against an opponent when they're doing it. So those movements I remember, but the brain, you must study the brain and understand how it actually works. Like I heard Sun Tzu, the Art of War. How do you guys pronounce? I pronounce it Sun Tzu.
Yeah, Sun Tzu.
Right.
Sun Tzu.
I pronounce it Sun Tzu.
Okay.
But he said, when I fight, I win. I like that. Hell, the thought of losing, quitting, or having doubt does not exist. And my head, my heart, nor my weapon signs, which means that when you say that, hell, you got to be good with these. And that means the total body, you have to be good with it. When you get in front of someone and being afraid doesn't exist because of the science in which you have. If that exists, then your science is not what it's supposed to be. You're not going to beat me up. You hear what I'm saying? You're not going to beat me in anything that I do in the science of fighting. I've trained too long and too hard to get beat up. And when I get close enough, and I'm going to get close, then I'm going to work the science in which I have been creating since the time that I started, been trying to create a way of fighting. And at this stage that I am now, even though my mobility isn't great, the lower part of my body, from my waist down, my legs, I allowed atrophy in my legs by working, doing protective service on Wesley Snipes for 10 years and not being active, sitting or standing all day, all night, all the time. So my legs are just starting to come back now where I can make movements. But upper part of the body is still sharp, still strong. And if I, even at 81, if I had my legs, I'd still be very quick in moving because the upper part of my body is. So I know that, like when I watch my teacher, Chuck, and the last time I saw him, I said, I can't believe Chuck. He doesn't appear to have slowed down in his movements that he's making. Because I think at the time I came by, we were doing techniques, Chuck. You had a technique line or something like that.
Yeah.
I think it was the time that I came by your house.
Right.
We were training. We had a technique line. They were flashing through those techniques. And over the years, I forgot them and I could not do them anymore because I had started learning to read the language of the body. Whatever the body do, I follow that. And I thought, I said, man, maybe I need to start back teaching those movements again. Hell, I couldn't remember them. So
No, sir. No, sir. You know, you're such an honest, humble, great example of a true martial artist. And it is obvious, resonates, and the great accomplishments. And I don't mean what you did in tournaments, but how you influenced others to be great within themselves. You know, be effective, be efficient, be authentic, and in your case, be great. I would bet that Mr. Sullivan is very proud of his student here.
Oh boy.
And Mr. Sullivan, I'm so grateful for you to introduce him to me and have him come on here, Sijo. It's always exciting to listen to you. Mr. Sullivan, your thoughts in conclusion.
Well, first of all, when Steve Muhammad and I would fight, everybody watched. I mean, no matter what they were doing, if they just fought or whatever, I mean, they'd all perk up because it was he and I going. And we looked like, almost like it was choreographed. I mean, we'd throw stuff and everybody'd be checking. We'd both be checking and it was so rare that either of us actually got a meaningful point on each other because our defenses were just so good. And of course, him with his mind sight, I mean, I couldn't touch him. I hoped every time I got him against him that he wouldn't be touching me either. But the only thing that kept me alive with Steve Muhammad was I had more experience at that time than he did. Now today, the experience has gone the other way because he's been in the trenches so much more than I have over these past years. But at that time, I had that much more experience, and that's the only thing that kept me alive. Otherwise, I'd have been done. And as far as like Ed Parker is concerned, one of his quotes that I love is, "It isn't who's right, it's who's left that counts." I love that.
Here. I agree with you. You know, Mr. Parker, an amazing mindset, was always prodding to find something from you. And in the conversations I had with him, I'm going to paraphrase one of his quotes along the lines of, he who knows how will be the student. He who knows why will always be the teacher. I'm going to conclude with that with Ed Parker.
All right, wait a minute.
Oh, yeah,
I want to conclude on an upbeat. Okay. I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you an example, doggone it, of just how quick Steve Muhammad is, and not necessarily with the body, but just the mind. Steve, you told me a story one time about you had busted a guy, and the guy gave you some trouble, so you beat the crap out of him. And then later on, you met the same guy, and the guy looked at you and he said, the last time we got together, he says, you use karate. He said, I'm going to see your karate and raise you one. And he produced a knife. Do you remember what your response was?
No, sir, not now.
You reached behind you, pulled your concealed weapon, pointed it at you, and you said, I'll see your one and I'll raise you 5.
Oh my goodness.
See,
Well, that place.
I didn't say that. My teacher said that, but I didn't want to tell.
Okay, good. And you know, we'll put the blame on him. I will conclude now with what Lee said. The intelligent mind constantly learning. And when he fails to do that, he will cease to be intelligent. Me, my comment is simple. There's no perfect life, but with you two gentlemen, you just created what we would call perfect moments. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You're amazing. You're truly special gifts to the martial arts community. And I am honored to even share this time with you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Paul.
Mr.
And
Sullivan
Steve,
and Sijo Muhammad. Thank you so much.
And Chuck is a gift to me. Don't ever think I don't love that man, because
I love you, man.
Yes, sir.
Take care of yourself, your brother.
God bless you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Have a good
Thank you,
day.
Paul.
Salute.
Salute.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, sir. Be safe.
Yes, sir. Grand Master.
Sijo Steve Muhammad, Senior Grand Master Chuck Sullivan, thank you. I really appreciate you taking time to share your personal stories, your anecdotes with us. The very best to you. Thank you so much, gentlemen.